Hi, everybody. I'm Cheryl Jackson. Good evening and welcome. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the Black Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda with my special guest panelist. I'm excited to have with me tonight Marcela Howell. She's the president and CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Hi, Marcela.
Hi, Cheryl.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We also have with us Dazon Dixon Diallo. She's the founder and president of Sister Love, Inc. Hi.
Hi, Cheryl. Happy to be here. Hi, Marcela.
Good to see you guys. Also, Dr. Toni M. She's the founder and board member of Interfaith Voices of Reproductive Justice, founding mother of Reproductive Justice as well. How are you, Dr. Toni?
Greetings, Cheryl. How are you? Hi, Marcela and Dazon.
Hi, Toni.
Hey.
I'm excited about today's town hall meeting. Hear our voices. And we are so excited about talking about this topic. Thank you to all who are joining us via Facebook, via our website, also via our YouTube pages. We want you to share it, share it, share it. Tell everybody about this conversation tonight. I think that you're going to find out a wealth of information. Now, listen, we'd love to learn more about the organizations that all of you ladies are representing tonight and how the Black Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda came to be. But first, let's share information about the organizations you represent. So Marcela, In Our Own Voices, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda's long-term vision is to use advocacy and policy change, leadership development, and strategies to build a powerful and sustainable network of Black women activists. Can you tell us more about the mission?
Sure, Cheryl. We are actually in our 7th year, and we started the organization specifically to lift up the voices of Black women leaders on national, state, and local policy issues that impact our lives. In the past, we've always seen other people speaking for us. Like whenever there was an issue around reproductive health or rights, it would be organizations like Planned Parenthood or NARAL or the Center for Reproductive Rights that were run by white women's organizations speaking about us. And we specifically started In Our Own Voice. That's why it's called that, so that people would get the idea that Black women could speak for themselves about these issues that impacted our lives. And we also specifically wanted it to be around reproductive justice, which is an intersectional view of the issues that impact our lives. And so that's what we wanted to do. That's what our organization is. And I should add that we have 8 partner organizations, Black women reproductive justice organizations, that are part of In Our Own Voice. And I want to shout out to those 8: Black Women for Wellness in California, Black Women's Health Imperative, which is a national organization, New Voices for Reproductive Justice, which is based in Ohio and Pennsylvania, Sister Love, Inc., with Dazon, who is part of one of our organizations in Georgia, Sister Reach in Tennessee, Spark Reproductive Justice Now, also in Georgia, and then the AFIA Center in Texas, and Women with a Vision in Louisiana.
And I love that we're having this conversation because we need to have our own voice when you have legislation and you have people trying to tell us what to do with our reproductive system. And I love that you guys are standing on the front line and making sure that we're making our own decisions. So Dazon, you're an advocate in the struggle for human rights and sexual and reproductive justice and the fight against HIV, and on behalf of communities of women and girls living with HIV and those at risk for HIV and STIs. Tell us more about Sister Love.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here with my sisters and with you, Cheryl. Sister Love, as a matter of fact, on this past Sunday, just turned 32 years old.
Wow.
We have worked for over 3 decades at the intersection of HIV. And I guess in today's context, you would also think about how we're using our own intersectionality approach to address an epidemic or pandemics, because that's really what HIV is and has been when we're looking at the burden of the epidemic in Black women worldwide. So Sister Love has worked domestically and internationally for that time on making sure that all of the intersections that impact women who are either facing the potential of becoming HIV infected or are already living with HIV, to deal more directly with not only their sexual and reproductive health, their rights and their justice, but also we're doing direct services in the way of providing testing and counseling and support services and linkage to care. In some instances, we're able to prescribe folks who are diagnosed with a sexually transmitted infection or who are looking for prevention. We also provide a lot of advocacy, a lot of leadership, development work, and most recently, we've built out a very robust research program because we believe that elevating community-based and community-led research can only enrich the field because it engages people who are living the experiences every day in helping find some of these right solutions. So we're excited about the totality of this agenda because it touches on so many different areas that Sister Love is already involved in. And what we're happy to do is also bring that global piece, Cheryl, because we've been doing this work in South Africa for 22 years and hosting convenings and running programs for adolescent girls and young women. And so all of this is built because we do believe that Black women, women of African descent worldwide, are going to lead us to the end of this epidemic. And we're going to do it using the reproductive justice framework.
That's awesome. So I love the arts and I love this poem that's on your website, right? Would you mind sharing that with our audience?
I am so glad you shared it because it used to be on our landing page. And when I saw you bring it, I was like, oh, we still have it on the website. Oh, I'm so excited. And so they had to point it out because our website is so full of beautiful images. And I have to give our sister, Sybil Miller, who handles our communications, and Katie Beltran, who is our artist and web designer. But here's the poem called Looking at Me. My Black skin, my thick lips, my flat nose, my curly hair are perfect and beautiful. I love them. They make me happy. They seduce me. I live all that through my culture, my values, my beliefs. I celebrate my life. I am Afro, I am Afro-descendant, and I am a queen in and through the mirror of history.
I love that. I love that. I love us. I love women and I love empowering women. That's kind of one of my passions. And for us to take on this approach to make sure that we are supporting each other and building each other up. And Dazon, I love that you're doing this worldwide, that it's not just here in the United States, but that your passion and your vision is to make sure that this work is being done across the world. So we're going to continue to move on. It's such a strong affirmation. Viewers are, we're taking your questions. I see a number of people. Cynthia Johnson just chimed in. She said, hey to us. And those that are watching via Facebook, those that are watching via our YouTube page, those that are watching on our website at praisedc.com and myspiritdc.com, we want to make sure at mymagicdc.com, I want you guys to leave your questions. If you have questions, we have the experts here. And so, we want to make sure we answer any questions that you may have. We want to make sure that if you have any not only just questions, but if you have comments or anything with regards to reproduction, that we have the experts here to talk to us about it. So make sure you interact with us, not letting us just have all the dialogue, right? All right, so Toni, Interfaith Voices of Reproductive Justice was created in 2018 by 5 Black women to build and galvanize an interfaith movement of progressive voices. Why was this movement so important to the 5 founders that created the IVRJ?
So thank you for that question, Cheryl, and thank you for having me on the show. So the work of IVRJ is really about creating a world where the moral authority and the moral capability of Black women and girls is affirmed. And it was important to us because we know that the Black church is a staple in the lives of many Black women, in the Black community, right? In the Black family. And oftentimes, the reproductive and sexual health decisions and behaviors are impacted by the teachings of the leadership of the Black church. We also understood the oftentimes detrimental impact of oppressive theological teachings in the lives of Black women and girls, and that those teachings have not only caused confusion about decisions, but have caused guilt and shame that Black women and girls have carried throughout their lives. And so for us, it was very important to create this organization of interfaith and progressive voices to help transform the theological narratives that center the moral authority of Black women and girls to make decisions, and to affirm that Black women and girls can make decisions about our reproductive and sexual lives, and that those decisions do come from a place of moral capabilities. And so we wanted to create this organization to do education and advocacy work, where we work with religious scholars and members of the clergy and Black women as theologians and Black women as ethicists to collectively create new theological narratives that affirm Black women and Black women and girls and their reproductive and their sexual health and decision making.
Got it. So we're excited to learn more about the Black Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda. But first, can you explain to our audience what reproductive justice, or RJ, is? And we're going to go back a little bit and talk about what reproductive justice is.
Sure, absolutely. And you're calling it what we already affectionately call it. We call it RJ. So reproductive justice, as those of us working in the movement have come to call it, reproductive justice, is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, right to have a child, the right not to have a child, the right to parent the children that we have with the social and economic supports to be safe, to live in sustainable communities, and to do that without fear of violence from law enforcement and other state and federal and local actors, and the right to overall bodily autonomy and sexual expression. Now, reproductive justice was conceptualized in Chicago, my hometown, and myself and 11 other Black women created or came up with the reproductive justice, laid the foundation for the theory and the framework in response to the then Clinton administration's proposal for healthcare reform in 1994. And the reason we felt that it was important for us to do this is because they presented a proposal that basically excluded reproductive and sexual health care coverage. And so we conceptualized reproductive justice out of a political opportunity, if you will, where we spliced together the concepts of reproductive justice and social justice and created reproductive justice. And so reproductive justice is grounded in human rights and Black feminist thought, bringing in intersectional theory and intersectional analysis. And we felt that it was important to include that and to take that approach because we know that Black women, Black people live their lives at the intersection of a myriad number of forms of oppression, race, age, class, gender. And so we felt it was important to do that. But it's important to note that reproductive justice, the theory and the strategy, is our approach, but human rights is our ultimate overall goal.
Right.
Right.
Right, exactly. I can imagine. And so being, African-American women ourselves, and we know what it's like when women are being violated and the things that we have to go through when women are being violated, being a youth pastor, young adult pastor, dealing with women and having to minister to them who've been violated, the things that we have to go through, the policies they have to go through, just as if they were not the victim, but those, that they were the offender. And so I really love the work that that you guys are doing, making sure that we are taking control of our own narrative. So at this point, we want to make sure that those who are listening, those that are viewing, if you have questions, we want to make sure that you leave your questions. I know you're taking it in and you're learning just as much as we're learning. If you have any questions or if you have any comments or any dialogue that you have with our experts, we want to make sure that you can do that on every platform that we have at this time. So Dr. Toni, faith has been a very strong foundation in the Black household. How does the policy agenda connect with reproductive justice and the faith-based community?
So from the very outset, when we talk about, in the section where we talk about the intersections of religion and reproductive justice, we start by talking about the impact or the historical abuse and dehumanization of Black bodies, and in particular, the bodies of Black women. Mm-hmm. And we talk about the role of the faith community or the religious community during that time, and talk about how Black women clung to their faith to make a way out of no way. And they really relied upon their faith as a tool to give them hope, mm-hmm. and to use that faith to encourage them in their activism also, to work to transform the world that we live in, the society that we lived in, and use faith actually as a tool, an advocacy tool, a tool to talk about human rights and to talk about how this country needed to create humanity, needed to treat humanity, to treat God's people. Mm-hmm. And so talk about how faith is a staple in the lives of Black women. And from that, we begin to talk about, in that section, about the varying forms of varying policies and pieces of legislation that are antithetical to the gospel as we know of, to be liberatory and to be a tool that Jesus used through Jesus's ministry, mm-hmm. to free God's people and to ensure that God's people could live out their lives in the way that God intended, respected and recognized with dignity, and treated as humanity. And that in the text it says that we have to love our neighbors, but we also have to recognize each other as a part of all of God's humanity. So when we lay out the issues and we talk about the policy that needs to be changed, we're talking about that through a lens of what it means to treat God's people as members of the broader humanity.
Got it. Marcela, the social justice and community justice and safety section of the policy agenda addresses many issues, including voting rights, policy violence, economic justice, environmental justice, and aging. Can you explain the importance of those issues?
Sure. The reality is that the policy agenda looks at the need for systemic change. It is not just about throwing out some issues and saying, here's some bills that would address that. What we're looking at is actually making change, and change that will empower Black communities and enrich them and give them sustainable actions that they can actually deal with. So what we did is we looked at the policy agenda as a way to dismantle racism and sexism and classism while centering the lived experiences of Black women, femmes, girls, gender-expansive individuals, and their communities. Mm-hmm. The reality is that Black women do not live in silos. Our lives are multifaceted. So you can't just take an issue, for instance, like Black maternal health and say, we're going to solve those issues without also looking at economic justice issues, environmental justice issues, things that impact on a Black woman's maternal health when she is pregnant. We also want to look at issues around voting rights. That part of reproductive justice is empowerment and empowering Black people to actually make decisions about their own lives, their families, and their communities. So we look at all of these issues. You can't look at these issues without addressing police violence and the fact that we are constantly hearing about more and more unarmed Black people being killed by police. We watched last year, there were two impactful things that were happening in 2020. One was the COVID pandemic, and then the other was the racial justice marches that basically called for racial justice after the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many more. So what we saw there was, we looked at those two things and said, we need to do something about that. And so we called together more than 30 Black women's organizations and RJ activists and said, we think it's time to present a policy agenda that is about Black people. And so that's how this came about. We looked at all of these things. We had meetings about it. It took 8 months to get it written, edited, rewritten, to brainstorm about some of the issues and how we thought they fit in everyday life. But we wanted to make sure that we were grounded in reproductive justice. It was looking at policy issues through an RJ lens, which rarely happens in legislatures and Congress. But we wanted to make sure that this is what this reflected. And so we had to blend all of those different issues. And the fact that we called it social justice, this particular section, social justice and community justice and safety, was because we were looking at those kind of issues and how they impacted the safety of the community. And it was a great experience. I mean, and sometimes when you do this and you call people together and they start working on something, as it gets longer and longer, people, like drop off and they're not interested in it anymore. That never happened. We would hold meetings every other week, and we would have the same people coming with the enthusiasm and the sort of righteousness about getting this done and making sure that it reflected our lived experiences that we then would take to Congress. And so that's how the policy agenda was formulated.
I love that. And I'm telling you, it's something that we really need to really fight for and to make sure. And I'm so glad that organizations are really following behind you guys and, making it happen for us, making sure our voices are being heard. So if you have a question in our audience, and Cynthia Johnson has a question. First off, I don't know how we identify what a serial baby mama is, but her question is, do serial baby mamas place an undue financial burden on taxpayers? And are there any legal protections for their children's education and care? Again, I'm not sure how we would identify what a serial baby mama is, but I don't know if any one of you guys want to tackle any of those, that pretty question. But I know we opened it up for anybody to have a question, and I think it's a real thing. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to, while I can still be here, and I hope I'm being heard okay,
yes, you're fine.
to take a look at this question. And I really want to start out with one of the reasons that the reproductive justice framework is so important and so powerful is that it is not only rooted in Black feminist theory, but it is also rooted in the whole framework of human rights. And so the first thing we have to do is, before we start labeling people based on some of the experiences that we're witnessing from outside of their lived experience, it gives us a way of looking at all of the intersections that happen in people's lives, right? And so there might be a different way that we approach looking. I'm not exactly sure what a serial baby mama is. I can get a guess that this is somewhat of a judgmental term, if I'm going to go there, on people who have children by different parents or by different fathers, in this instance, if we're talking about a baby mama. And who knows what those circumstances are? Black women are at the bottom rung when we're talking about economic opportunity, as well as economic wealth and generational wealth, and in terms of dependence on our partners for support when we have children. And so there may be a situation where someone who is dependent on their partner, right, and they have a child by that partner, that they keep that partner somewhere within their existence so that they can keep that child supported. I think what we need to be thinking more about is how our economy, our politics, and the systemic racism and sexism has set Black women up to not succeed regardless of their reproductive choices. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to address, and that's what we have to tackle. It's a bigger issue when you're talking about how our children are taken care of, how our children are given equitable, equal, and just access to education and appropriate, high quality, and sustainable education programs, and even schools in our communities, and the care. I mean, we could talk about whether or not we have children who end up in foster care, for example, because their mothers or their parents weren't in the same economic or even mental or physical position to take care of their children. And people in foster care are financially supported to take care of that mother's child, versus a system and a program that supports that mother to keep her children safe and healthy with her. So that is an issue of reproductive justice. That comes into that pillar around the right to parent the children that we have with the appropriate economic, social, and political supports that are needed in our environments to raise our children the way we need to raise them, regardless of what somebody thinks about the choices I make, regardless of the kinds of labels that people put on me. What I need is equity, justice, and access to those same issues that other people who don't look like me already have. So I think that there's a reason for us to really dig deeper than what we see on superficial levels, and, you know, charging with labels versus understanding the lived experiences and where people's decisions and choices come from.
Got it.
I'd like to respond to that too, Cheryl.
Okay.
And thank you. And so, and ditto to everything that Dazon said. I'd like to offer to the listener that, one, words and language are important and powerful. And so we have to be mindful of how we talk about Black women in a society that has historically and continues to devalue and dehumanize Black women, oftentimes through language. Mm-hmm. And so where do we bring in our empathy and our compassion? That's the first thing. The second thing is what I think perhaps your listeners is trying to underscore is those instances where there may be an individual who may have had a number of pregnancies by a number of different people. Mm-hmm. But what I understand, what I'm sure my colleagues would co-sign, that some of what we've come to understand is that our society has not done a great job of education, and particularly education around reproductive and sexual health. We make assumptions that people come out of the womb, so to speak, understanding their bodies, but they do not. As we see evidenced by the number of individuals who maybe don't even understand how their menstrual cycle functions. How do you chart your menstrual cycle so that you can control your fertility? There are a number of women and girls who still don't understand that basic reproductive and sexual health 101. And so there's a need for a tremendous amount of work to advocate within our school systems, because far too many schools don't teach comprehensive, medically evidence-based reproductive and sexual health education. There's that. The other thing is, we know that families grapple with having this conversation for a number of reasons, right? And first and foremost, a lot of what has come out of the Black church, teachings of that the body is not clean, that having sex is taboo, that there's something wrong with being sexually active. There's something wrong with our sexual choices, even that the menstrual cycle shouldn't be embraced. And so we have to have conversations about how we advocate for our school systems to do better. And how do we empower Black women to demand more from our religious institutions to speak to the needs that concern us? So it's much more broader, right? As Dazon has elaborately said, has elaborately and so very eloquently discussed. But I just wanted to offer, let's figure out how we use more embracing language for each other, because we're talking about ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you know what? Unfortunately, there probably are some people that try to take advantage of the system that could probably be labeled that. But as Dazon said, it could be a number of reasons why uneducated. It could be a number of reasons why, with regards to background. It could be a number of why as to the history of oppression. It could be a number of reasons why people will take on that type of label, because even it doesn't surprise me when we start seeing, even on reality TV, people celebrating situations like that, or situations or labels like that. But it like you said, Dr. Toni, it really does take on the fact of women rallying around women and celebrating who we really are and understanding who we really are, to take those labels off of us, right? And really giving them the understanding of who we are and celebrating our bodies, celebrating who we are, and taking those labels away, not celebrating those labels, or even acknowledging that is a label, right?
Even in terms of when you talk about folks trying to game the system, if you will, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about people trying to make a way out of no way, living in a society where they have been denied so much, and have not had access to so many things, have been forced to live off of scraps, literally making a way out of no way. So even when we talk about, trying to game the system, I think we have to really, think deeply about what does that mean to game a system that has devalued people's lives historically since the time they were brought to these shores.
Yeah. I'm glad we're having the conversation, because I really wanted, I know that somebody could scratch their head and say, why would she say that? Why would she ask that? But I think it's a conversation that we need to have, you know what I mean? Because
Absolutely.
It really does happen. And when we're talking about letting our voices be heard, we want to make sure that we see it. My heart is compassionate with regards to women who walk in that vein, in that negative space, right? As a woman of faith, my heart goes out, because it's like, why do we think that way? Why do we want to be labeled that? Why do we walk in that space instead of shaking my head at them, or shaking my head, or feeling like, belittling them? My heart really goes out to women who want to be labeled that, or who want to usurp the system that way, because there's a reason why they're walking in that space. There's a reason why, they're having all these kids by so many different men, and, on purpose, right? Like you said, Dr. Toni, it could be the lack of education, the lack of knowledge, the lack of wisdom, the lack of mentorship, the lack of, generational information, it could be a lack of all of that. So my heart really goes out to women who really walk in that space. So that's why I wanted to address the question and hear from all of you guys. But we're going to continue to move on.
Yeah.
So Dazon, in the sexual and reproductive health section of the policy agenda, recommends Congress support programs that provide comprehensive sexual health education that includes content on physical development, sexual contraception, STI, HIV, pregnancy prevention, kind of like what we were just talking about, just to name a few, right? What is your research showing that encourages the recommendation in the agenda?
Certainly, and before I get to the actual background data that provided the content for our recommendations and for the different policies that we're also supporting or offering in the agenda, I think there are three really powerful things that just came from Dr. Toni's comments. And one of those, and I'll just start here where it's still very uncomfortable for a lot of people, but that is when we think about what we mean when we're saying people, especially Black people, Black women in particular, are gaming the system. I think we have the script flipped in the wrong direction, and that for more than 400 years, this system in the United States has been gaming the lives of Black women through exploitation, through objectification, through hypersexualization, through separation of our families, through snatching our children right out of our bodies and selling them. So there's been all kinds of gaming that's been played out in our bodies and in our lives and on our minds for over 400 years. A second, just in this country, a second component to that is that the education, which is also wrapped up in some of our culture, in some of our heritage, and yes, in some of our faith belief systems, has not given our parents, our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, the language, the information, the education to pass down. I can remember when first working with Dr. Toni, for example, circling all the way back to just basic health and talking about healthy vaginas. When's the last time you had mothers and daughters and grands sitting around talking about douching or talking about all of those things that don't happen because we haven't given ourselves the freedom and the permission and the proper information to do so. And then the third thing is around this comprehensive sexual health education is that it has to start somewhere. And I know Toni mentions the girls. It has to start somewhere so that we break that cycle of ignorance, that we break that cycle of silence, that women are parents are not passing that information. And not only that information, but being in those safe, or not even safe, but brave and courageous spaces to tell their own stories, to talk about their own experience when they first got their periods, when they had their first sexual encounter, when they felt those butterflies in their stomach, when they fell in love, when they first thought that they might have been pregnant, when they didn't intend to be. All of these are stories that are real that they don't tell us because we have kept so many secrets for so long. So I do want to add this, that I think what's important about what's being recommended in this particular policy is that we are looking at comprehensive sexual health education, one, very much more intersectionally and factually. And we're not just talking about the physical components. We're also talking about the relational aspects. We're talking about making sure that there's equity and justice given to the information around sexual identity, around LGBTQI experiences, around transgender experiences, around sexual debut, around all of these things that people don't necessarily talk about. And they're not even talking about our reproductive anatomies, right? So if I don't even know what my body parts are and what they actually do, I can't tell you how many people over 40 that we encounter all the time who think that they have one hole that everything comes out of in their vaginas. And we know that that's not the truth. And of course, you can call Sister Love for the specific education on that. I do want to offer that in addition to what we do around what we're offering and what we're looking for, our research has told us that the more we lean into denying comprehensive sexual health education, we actually increase unintended pregnancies, we increase sexually transmitted infections and HIV transmissions, we increase by just default incidences of gender-based violence. Because if we're not informed, if we're not empowered enough to protect the bodies that we have and our lives, then we fall more victim to those kinds of experiences. So what we also know is that parents don't have these conversations. If they're not even grappling with them as much as Toni talked about in our experience, it's because they already think that the schools are doing it. Or they expect the schools to do it because they don't feel comfortable that they know enough to do it themselves. So I want to offer that the other part that Sister Love is bringing to the education about what we're doing with this agenda is we're also pushing for how do we hold these conversations at the community level. We need community-based comprehensive sexual health education as much as we need it in the schools, so that our pastors, our priests, our teachers, our administrators, our business owners, our parents, our students, our aunties, that everybody in the community is learning the information together in their own groupings and also as a collective, so that we're breaking this cycle of continuing to find ourselves in these places of ignorance where we are seeing, in terms of the number that we actually have, a larger number of abortions. A lot of that is about economic decisions, not necessarily about our moral judgments. We also are people who are experiencing, especially Black women, who are experiencing the HIV epidemic is still at about 2/3 of all HIV among women in this country are Black. And so we have a whole lot of issues that we need to address that are all happening at the same time in a given person's life. So the silos around pregnancy or HIV or sexual violence or contraception or access to abortion, that all of those silos are not serving us in our entire lives, because we live intersectional lives, which means we have to have intersectional solutions and responses. And that's why we're putting forward all of these comprehensive ideas inside this one, even just this one particular policy. There's a number of pieces of legislation that we're supporting in this agenda that when you look at it like a whole menu or on one full plate, like you're at one of those big old smorgasbord places where, you just pile on everything that you need or want on your plate. That's how we have to tackle all of these issues. And that's what the Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda does, at least for where Sister Love is doing our work with the agenda.
I love that. I love that. My mom was one of those women in our community where all the girls would go and talk, because, she was the one that would be blunt and would be, she wasn't afraid to share and talk. I didn't have that growing up. So I understand what you're saying about generations of people not sharing, not knowing, not getting the information that they were supposed to get from home or school or the church or the community center, or not just knowing their bodies. My mother was not, she was that one that was just always outspoken and was the one that was, this is how you get pregnant. This is what you have to do. This is how you protect yourself. This is what, you know what I mean? She was that. And I'm grateful for that. And in turn, I was that mom. I was the youth pastor that was telling everybody, listen, condoms, I was the one, you know what I mean? I was that youth pastor that says, listen, if you're sexually active, this is what you need to do. And this is what this is what you're up against if you're sexually active. I was the youth pastor that's telling the truth about what's going on with our bodies. And that's what we have to stop hiding under a bushel. We have to tell the truth about what's going on with our bodies. Right. That's what we have to do. That's what Hear Our Voices is about. That's what these policies are about, is making sure that legislation is representing us. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Let's get back to topic.
I love it.
Marcela, the policy agenda will need support from members of Congress to help implement the policy recommendations. How are you working to achieve this?
Well, one of the things that we started with is when we were still writing it, we sent drafts to the offices of members of the Congressional Black Caucus to review and to give us some input into it. So that was a head start for us, because as people gave us their input, they were also seeing things and saying, well, let me know when you're going to actually launch this, because we would be interested in working with you on it. So we've got a large number of members of Congress in the Congressional Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Pro-Choice Caucus, who are all supporting the policy agenda. We have specific bills in it that we as organizations are supporting that have been introduced by some of these members of Congress. But we also have policy pieces that we talk about that are still needed and don't have legislation written yet. And we've gotten support from people saying, well, we'd like to work with you on this. We'd like to be the person who's introducing this legislation. So we've been in these conversations with members of Congress as the thing was being written, and once it was launched, we got even more people in support. So we decided, since it was about Black communities, we wanted to start with the Congressional Black Caucus members, and then reach out. And of course, we were looking at not only just in the House, but also in the Senate, Senator Booker, Senator Warnock, both of whom are also supporting pieces in it. And so we're looking at it that way, in getting people to support. We've run ads, we've run radio ads, in fact, on Radio 1, asking people to call their members of Congress and ask them to support and sign on to the policy agenda. We've run ads in Black newspapers, asking people to also go on our website at blackrj.org to really send letters. We've got a whole platform on there where you can go in, put in your address, find out who your representative is and your 2 senators, and send a letter. There are letters there, sample letters that you can just send right off. And so we're doing that kind of stuff to really build up the support, not only in Congress, but support out in the community. We are literally doing things that will galvanize more and more people to actually support the policy agenda, and building up a grassroots kind of effort to make sure that people are looking at it saying, we like this is something that we work on. And even from the organizations that we had who helped to write it, we went to organizations that did a wide range of different issues, like some who worked on education, some that worked on violence against women, some that worked on housing, worked on police violence, all of those different issues. And we were able to galvanize them to actually come together under this umbrella of this policy agenda to say, yeah, we're willing to work with you on this. We want to help write it. We want to help promote it. And so we've been doing that. And next month in August, we're doing an entire social media campaign around it. Awesome. That all the organizations will be signing on to. And we're pulling them back together next week on Thursday, all the ones who helped write it. And we're going to talk about the social media campaign that we're going to run throughout the month of August. And we're hoping to really just keep generating interest and activities and excitement. That's the one thing that we have found, that people, when they hear about it, they're really excited about it. And because it's never been done before, there's never been this innovative type of document. And so people are really excited about it. And that's basically where we are.
I love it. I'm excited about it. So, Dazon, how can we get involved with Sister Love?
Wow. Well, to get involved with Sister Love, it's a couple of different ways. A lot of it right now, because of the age we're in, is all digital, right? So Sister Love has a lot of robust content and activities on our website at sisterlove.org, as well as on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and even on TikTok. We are all in those spaces because we're also very intergenerational, the same way that this whole project has come together. I think what Marcela was talking about, people who are learning about the agenda are excited. I can tell you, I intentionally engaged some of our newest and youngest people on staff to take on some of the parts of the agenda and write it. They were so excited. They were so honored to be asked to do this. And then they see it come out in something that's going to live forever in the annals of U.S. history documents because it's been submitted to Congress, right? That their words are going to matter to Black women and girls forever, I think is important. But in terms of getting involved with us, we have so many different activities going on. We're based in Atlanta. We're also based in South Africa. We have a meeting that's coming up that we hold right now, virtual regional conversations on these very issues called Women Now Continuum. You can find us at womennow.world for those upcoming meetings. We got meetings coming up in the Pacific Rim and in Europe. We finished 4 meetings in the Western Hemisphere and in parts of Africa. We'll be going back to Africa after Europe, and the the Middle East and North Africa regions as well. So we're doing all of that kind of stuff to get involved. When it comes to how we're engaging around the agenda, though, what's important is that you find a way to make the agenda meaningful in your own life and in the lives of the people that you're associated with or concerned and loving. And one of those, of course, and Toni will talk about how you can get to read it, but it is a robust and very rich document that could be read as a book. So if you're in a book club, for example, switch out the books that you're reading, put down the novel for this month's read, and pick up the RJ agenda and assign different chapters and sections to the agenda and have discussions. Read the cases, because we've included case stories with each of the sections, and find those voices in your own circles and on your own communities who share those stories. I think the storytelling for people's lived experiences that they see show up in this agenda are going to only increase and promote and spread the information, but also the engagement with the agenda. That's really, really important. And of course, tell others about it. Share the links, make sure that people know where to get it and how to talk about it. If there are places in the agenda that match up to pieces of the scripture, pull those out and have those conversations in your study, in your Bible study circles. If there's spaces that are showing up in, English lit that you're taking in class, there are so many different ways that you can look at this agenda, because it's also written beautifully. So it's going to look like a literary piece for some people as well. So there are a lot of different ways to get engaged with this. And most importantly, is that when you see those policy pieces and you hear from us, because we want you to subscribe to blackrj.org so you can follow and understand what's happening with the policy pieces. But when you find out that the legislation is moving, then that's your turn to get involved with your civic responsibility and duty to either make your vote heard on these issues, to make sure that your legislative, your elected officials know how you feel about these issues. If they haven't heard of the agenda, share it with them. They'll appreciate you and they'll remember you for that. So make sure that you are engaging with your local electeds as well as your state level electeds and your national or your congressional representatives and delegates that are in Washington. Because once we get through at this national level, we now have to look at how these issues are being impacted by policies at the state level.
Right.
And that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's also where it's pretty oily and slippery right now. And so, especially in the deep South where I live, and that's more than a geographic distinction, we all know that. So it's very important to also recognize how these agenda items that we have shared are also showing up at your state and local levels as well, because what may not be happening in DC can be happening in your town.
Right. Right. Dr. Toni, how can the audience read the full Black Reproductive Justice Policy agenda?
Indeed. Let me just say that this agenda was written by, for Black women, for us to talk about the barriers that we need to transcend and the world that we want to see created, that Black women, their families, their communities deserve to live in. But people can read the full agenda by visiting In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. That's www.blackrj.org. Going to Sister Love's website, www.sisterlove.org, and going to Interfaith Voices for Reproductive Justice's website, which is www.iv4rj.org.
I like it. And of course, we have the website right there on the banner, too, for those who are watching via Facebook, YouTube, or our website at praisedc.com. Now, before we close, please share with our listening audience your company's website. Again, I know Dr. Toni did really quickly. So do that, share your website. And thank you to Marcela. Thank you to Dazon. Thank you to Dr. Toni for joining us this evening. But before we go, and I do all of those goodbyes, share all of your websites once again.
Okay, if you want to go on In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, the website is www.blackrj.org.
Awesome.
And if you want to get involved with Interfaith Voices for Reproductive Justice, love to have you. You can visit us at www.iv, the number 4, rj.org. And I'm sure our CEO, Charity Woods Barnes, would love to have more folks join in on our work.
Right.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For Sister Love, you can join us at www or www, I like that, Toni, www.sisterlove.org and womennow.world, which has our global conversation that reflects a lot that's also in the Black RJ agenda. I do want to, Cheryl, just quickly, when you ask how can the audience read the agenda, Toni talked about how they can access it to read it, but how you can actually read it is read it out loud. Read it to somebody else.
Right.
Read it when you're going to sleep. Read it, and even record some of it so you can share it with your voice text messages. Just how you read it is not just only how you can access it, but how you ingest what's in it is also critical. So make sure that maybe how you can read it is in family circles. Maybe how you can read it is when your young people are doing their homework and asking some of the same questions in their civics class that's showing up in the policy agenda. There are lots of different ways of how you can engage, and it's just the beginning of how women and people in the Black community can take on and learn how policy works and how we can put our own voice and our power to telling our elected officials what we see, how we know what we see works, and what we want to see them do with it when we make these recommendations.
I really, really love this conversation. And can I tell you, I love you guys. I feel so empowered to be around so many powerful women. You guys have really, really empowered me tonight, right? To want to be involved and to want to hear more and be a part of what's going on. So if you're just tuning in, I'm talking with Marcela Howell. She is the president and CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Also, Dazon Dixon Diallo, founder and president of Sister Love, Inc., and Dr. Toni M, PhD, founding board member of Interfaith Voices of Reproductive Justice, founding mother of Reproductive Justice. And we've been talking about the Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda. This has been so absolutely good. Thank you to every listener and viewer, those who've watched on our YouTube pages, those who've watched on our Facebook page, those who've watched on our website. Thank you for interacting with us. Thank you for your questions and comments. And even if you if you still have questions, go onto the website, find out more information on how you can get involved. Hear our voices. This has been an amazing town hall meeting. Thank you for empowering us tonight, ladies. To our queens, thank you so much for sharing all of this information. Get involved for everyone who has been watching on all of our platforms. Have a great night tonight. This has been great. Have a great night, okay?
Thank you,
It's been a delight.
Thank you.